Welcome everyone to the second episode of the first season of the FIP Chief Executive Officer interviews. Today I am welcoming Andy Gray to the interview chair. Thanks so much, Andy, for making time for us and your busy agenda, especially during these strange COVID-19 times we're living in. I wanted to welcome you to our first season of the FIP CEO interviews. We're running 10 such interviews in this season with global leaders and colleagues in pharmacy and healthcare, and we want to seek to explore your journey, your experiences, and the impact of those experiences on your professional practice. I was inspired to start these discussions after FIP President Dominique Jourdain and myself were having a discussion with Professor Trevor Jones around the development of a vaccine and treatment for COVID-19. At that time, Trevor walked us through his experiences with AZT in the 80s and 90s and how invaluable those lessons were for now. Not only was he open about what had gone well, but also what hadn't gone to plan. You know, what he'd learned from the mistakes along the way. And it made me reflect, Andy, on how important it is for our pharmacy leaders to be able to share such insights and be able to share the experiences when things go well, and possibly more importantly, when they don't quite go to plan, what we can learn from those experiences. So Andy, I'm so proud to interview you today in this first season, and I can't wait to share some of those insights with our profession. And maybe I might even take some life lessons for me too. We won't take more than 30 minutes of your time. But Andy, before we get to the professional elements of the interview, let's start right at the beginning. Welcome, Andy.
Welcome. Thank you.
It's lovely to have you. So, Andy, I noted from your biography, which is so super impressive, that your story starts at Queen's College, Queenstown in South Africa. Can you tell us a little bit about your childhood and where your inspirations came from for choosing your career?
Certainly. So I grew up in a small town. Queen's College is a major boarding school located in a small northeastern Cape Town. But my mother was a teacher at the primary school there, and so I was one of the few day boys. Queenstown has a very old, now more than 100 years old, community pharmacy called Major and March. And I really was inspired by Mike Major as an exemplar of what a health professional could be. But I loved getting into his Galenical store. I was one of those kids with a little chemistry set, and I think I bought absolutely everything that I could find on Mike Major's shelves. But he inspired me to head off to Rhodes University in Grahamstown to study pharmacy.
Yeah, I think this is so impressive, isn't it? It's not only the notable teachers that help us along our ways, but also role models in the community. Andy, we'll come back to the way in which Major was an exemplar for you along the way. I'm going to move now to a little bit about your career achievements. I note when I see your biography, a career full of experiences across the board. Community during your internship, hospital, academia, and then of course your incredible and notable achievements in drug studies and evidence. Over the past 20 years or so, you've consolidated a successful career in academia. And I can see that you have policy analysis, processes of development and implementation of national medicines policies, rational medicines use, application of antiretroviral therapy in resource-constrained settings. How important for right now. We, of course, will be putting your bio on the website as well, but more than 120 research papers, book chapters, books, 50 other publications and more, and then commissioned researches. Now, this is very, very impressive, and we know that you are an eminent advisor on many boards, etc. When I take you through those notable achievements, you're probably going to reflect on the lessons that we learn along the way that don't just come from successes. What would you consider to be the 3 biggest lessons of your career, Andy, to date?
So the first thing I think is what makes a pharmacist different. So we operate in team environments where we are contributing to either clinical decisions at an individual level or to policy decisions at a population level. But what pharmacists bring to that table is a unique set of skills located in our knowledge of chemistry, of pharmaceutics, of drug product logistics, and then the clinical on top of it. And I think what has shaped my career more than anything else was my hospital experience. I worked in a 2,000-bed teaching hospital attached to the medical school, but in a very particular era. This was during apartheid in South Africa. This was a hospital designated for Black and Indian patients only. No white patients were admitted there. And so it was under-resourced, and yet provided such an amazing opportunity for us to grow, to learn, to build those teams, and to change the way that we were practicing pharmacy. And I think that's the key, is remaining a pharmacist and yet stretching into all of the other opportunities that life presents you.
That's fabulous. So thinking about how you would use your under-resourced situation to get the biggest opportunities, that's one of the biggest lessons of your career there, remaining a pharmacist throughout the whole of your notable career to date would be a second one. And then the unique set of knowledge and skills, Andy. These three pieces I think we'll come back to throughout the rest of the interview. But I am thinking that remaining a pharmacist is really important to you. You've said that several times. Yeah, very, very good for our young pharmacists and scientists.
Absolutely. So, if there's anything that I've always looked at and said, please never apologize for being a pharmacist. Never preface anything by, I'm only a pharmacist, but we bring unique skills to that table and they are met by no one else. And we should never be apologetic for them.
It's so true, isn't it? Especially right now, if you think about the situation we are in globally, all sectors of our profession have really been enabled to shine, from the academics who have to do things differently through to the community pharmacists who've remained essential workers all the way through to the hospital. And we mustn't muddle modesty for confidence, Andy. Very good. I'm writing myself notes. So, Andy, the next set of questions that we have really kind of come from the experience that you've had. If I was to have maybe 2 or 3 hours of interview time with you, that probably would be just enough time to list the external advisory, expert and leadership roles you've held in the past decades. But when I look at this, there's a breadth and depth of experience you've established from the years, which of course a biog is always there to showcase. From your work with WHO on expert committees, a lot of this is about selection and use of essential medicines, which I can see really sits well with the country you're in, and also the ways in which you've worked through the years. Chairing expert committees on medicines for children as well, WHO task force on hormonal contraception, HIV, joint United Nations programs for HIV and AIDS, scientific panels, review committees by the handfuls. And then you have the appointments you currently hold, Andy, which are not limited to visiting fellows, honorary senior scientists, consultant pharmacists in the Centre for AIDS Programme of Research in South Africa, various memberships and chairings of advisory committees and non-executive director positions, as well as chairmanships. That, alongside the awards, which are numerous, many from FIP itself, Andy, which we'll come to, really showcase to me someone who has striven to develop and forge expertise and experience, but not just sit on that expertise. You're seeking to influence and to mould that. Now, Andy, we know that what we list in a CV is the tip of the iceberg. What would you say for you, out of that multiple list of achievements, are your 3 biggest achievements to date?
That's a really tough one. And I think I'd like to spread it a little bit. I started at King Edward Hospital getting really involved in pharmacokinetics, and we ran therapeutic drug management clinics, epilepsy clinics, warfarin clinics, and the like. That set me up perfectly for my work in medicines for children. So the first I'd like to highlight is the subcommittee on essential medicines for children, which created the WHO model list for children and has continued since that first effort in 2007. I think it bringing the kinetic knowledge and the clinical experience from a hospital environment into a multidisciplinary team and developing something from scratch 30 years into the history of the WHO EML was really important. My policy work really came from professional politics. I was, as vice president of our hospital association here in South Africa, engaged in dealing with our government as we try to revise all of our healthcare laws after apartheid. But that led eventually to a very proud moment as co-chair of the Lancet Commission on Essential Medicines Policies. And I think that brought together a collection of knowledge, a collection of people, and a collective contribution to an understanding of pharmaceutical policy. The third area perhaps is on the regulatory side. I was invited to join the Names and Scheduling Committee of the Medicines Control Council and eventually served on the council itself, and I continue to work in that space, but it's led me into work with WHO and with the Commission on Narcotic Drugs and the International Narcotic Control Board. And I think it's bringing the history of the clinical engagement around, for example, pain and palliative care into the regulatory side as well as the policy side that's enabled me to operate at that level, at an international and international level. So we're confronting emerging issues, cannabis and cannabinoid containing medicinal products, and being open and understanding the history, the background, the clinical space, as well as the regulatory and the legal space is, I think, something that I'm particularly proud of.
Well, I don't blame you, Andy. It's an amazing story, if you like. And what I really love is when we started with your childhood and you were talking about Major and March, you spoke about it being a Galenical store. So you were obviously inspired by the science of how things work. And then in the second question, we've gone through what makes the pharmacist different and our unique set of skills. And there you are demonstrating this with your story. Understanding how medicines work, the therapeutic drug monitoring piece leading you into meds for children, and then the professional politics leading you to policy, and then understanding the place of regulation. For me, I don't know what you feel about this.
Can I interrupt for half a second, just to close that loop? You mentioned the sharing and having interns, being able to teach postgraduate students is, I think, something that every single pharmacist should be engaged in. We're all teachers because we should all be learning. But just to close that loop, my daughter is a pharmacist and Mike Major's granddaughter is currently her intern. So the world is a very strange place and the loops close in ways you never expect.
I love that. I was actually going to ask you there, Andy, about what was your view on, you know, interns and bringing people up through the ranks, given your inspiration started back in your childhood. And that story about your daughter and the granddaughter linking things up is just beautiful. That's really, really lovely. So you jumped in there at exactly the same point that I was going to mention to you. This idea, what about your view on, I hear a lot like from parts of the profession, I'm only a community pharmacist, so I couldn't possibly have anything to share with interns, or I'm being devilish here, but Andy, what would your view be on that?
I think COVID has really underlined for us what a crucial role community pharmacy plays. I admit that there are community pharmacists who perhaps do not practice at the very limit of their skills. Often that is a circumstance that is forced upon them by virtue of where they work, the business that they operate in, and the ways in which the health system remunerates pharmacists for their activities. But I really do believe that every part of pharmacy, community distribution, manufacturing, academia, hospital, policy and regulatory, all are opportunities to show pharmacists the breadth of our profession and enabling them to have exposure, externship opportunities in all of those practice settings, I think is absolutely crucial.
I believe so too, Andy, because I think practice changes. So if you and I worked in community a few years ago, it would be good for us to dip our toe in to understand what was going on, let alone at the start of your career when you need to have exposure to as many things as possible. And many of the patients that you were looking after with HIV and AIDS back in the day, they're now living in communities, and community pharmacists are the ones who have to manage their comorbidities now, don't they? So it's that other closing the loop, to bring us back to the comment that you mentioned earlier on. Yeah, it's really good. I'm now thinking about, Andy, with all of that you've painted for us. You have awards, you have honorary positions, you have a litany of chairmanships and directorships. What are the three things that you are most proud of? And they can be anything.
I think there's, as an academic, you're always proud of particular publications or contributions. There have been a few in that area that I think are worthwhile noting. Being able to contribute to a large-scale clinical trial requires a different set of skills. It's very different from writing a single-authored paper. And at Caprisa, we were able to engage in a study on the timing of antiretroviral treatment in patients co-infected with tuberculosis. And the results that we obtained in that study very, very quickly led to changes in global policy. So that's not only one of my most highly cited papers, but and one that was in a prestigious journal, but I think it embodied a different sort of approach to science that I was very lucky to be able to contribute to. I've mentioned the Lancet Commission paper. That was obviously a major effort, but there's another. Together with a colleague, Candy Day, I've been co-authoring a chapter in the South African Health Review that covers health-related indicators for South Africa on an annual basis. And we've developed that into a major resource for researchers, for students, and I think it's been not only a sustained product, but one that has grown over time and I think is quite unique. So apart from that, I think what FIP gave me, and I've been recognized by FIP and also by the American Society of Health System Pharmacists, is the ability to play on an international stage, to learn through engagement with people from so many other countries, and to get a sense of how different we are, but how as pharmacy, there's some golden thread that runs through absolutely all of our health systems and our experiences. And I think it's FIP, the positions that I've been able to hold, and the recognition that I've got on the international pharmacy side, which I would say I'm very proud of. And then lastly, when your alma mater recognizes you, I received a Distinguished Old Rhodian Award from my alma mater, Rhodes University. And Rhodes is in a tiny town, another Eastern Cape town, but it's a town where my family has been going to study since 1906. So I think that was also a special moment in my career.
So Andy, there are three major things. Could I just drill down a little bit more? You mentioned in the first one about the clinical trial that it required a different set of skills to that of a single author. What would you say those skills are? Because I think these are defining of Andy, and I'm going to drill down into the three of those areas to find a little bit more about you.
Certainly. So it's the humility to know what it is that you know, but what it is that you don't know, to recognize the skills and the contribution of others, and to bring that all together to one endpoint. So in the case of a clinical trial in co-infected HIV/TB patients, we needed clinicians, we needed research nurses, we needed biostatisticians, we needed data managers. We needed someone who could put this all together and get it through a large funding organization and raise the considerable resources that are needed to do a large-scale clinical trial. You needed somebody to work with the regulatory bodies and the ethics committees. And that is very different from someone sitting in their own laboratory controlling their own research project. And I think those large clinical trials, even though they result in papers with a slew of authors, require something completely different. But critically, they all require a pharmacist. A clinical trial without a properly designed clinical pharmacy program is never going to work.
Well, what I sense there from that a little bit of scrutiny is three words here, and there's something about humility, there's something about teamwork, which has come out throughout the whole of this interview, Andy, with you, and the idea that you need that clinical pharmacy expertise. So if I reflect back to you what you told us about working with Candy to produce a South African health review, which has turned out to be a major resource, I sense there's somebody who likes to share things, which again is another teamwork. I always find it interesting how people describe things, and so I'm going to drill down a little bit. Why is it important for you to have a major resource? It could just be a set of papers, but why does it have to be a resource, Andy?
Whenever we publish, we hope that someone out there is going to read it. And we measure that through citation indices, for example. But it's that moment when you're asked a question and someone is looking for a piece of data that they just can't find, and you can say to them, go and open up the website at Health Systems Trust, look for the health review, and you'll find 10 years of chapters, and it'll give you 10 years of longitudinal data on a particular point, or it will give you a link to the original source of something with a commentary and an added value component to it. So partly it's just that joy of that moment where you're able to satisfy someone's requirement for data, or you're able to answer the question. And that, I think, is not only something an academic shares, but it's something that a health professional shares.
Yes, you want people to build on your work, stand on the shoulders of giants, as opposed to go back and start it all from the beginning. There's a very different approach there. I can really feel it. The third piece, actually, Andy, reflecting back on this particular question before we move on, is just how peer recognition, obviously to an academic, peer recognition is really important. That's the whole way in which, peer review and peer recognition is the way in which academia works, if you like. But there's something about being recognised by your family, whether it's the alma mater or by your national or international organisation. And I could sense the importance of recognition from ASHP, from your alma mater, and from FIP itself meant so much to you. Would you say that the professional pride of peer recognition is often understated?
Yes, I suppose there's something sort of English about the background that I grew up in, where we aren't very good at blowing our own trumpets. But there is a drive that comes from being able to compete for something and then being told that you've been recognized as having made that goal that you set for yourself. But I think there's something else. Many of these are opportunities to speak, to write, to share, and then to reflect on your own progress through time. So your own professional career. I used to read the American Hospital Pharmacy Journal on a monthly basis, and I thoroughly enjoyed reflections from leaders within that environment and those who got the Frankie Medal, for example. and they would write about their careers or something that made them particularly excited about the profession. And I always learned from those as much as I learned from clinical papers. And so that opportunity to share, to reflect, to stop and go, how did I get here and what does that mean? I think is also important.
I think it's essential. I really love that. And it's a nice segue into our sixth question, which is the top tips. Now, you just mentioned, Andy, the opportunity to speak and write and share and reflect. We don't often give ourselves that opportunity, and we definitely don't build it into our lives when we're juniors in the profession. What would be your 3 top tips to the next generation?
Firstly, get involved. It's one thing to have done the training, to have written the exams, to have completed the pre-registration time, to be competent in your professional environment. But it's through engagement as a professional in your professional associations and in other opportunities in service organizations, for example, that stretch you and that introduce you to something you perhaps didn't know was out there that might interest you, and it can shape your career completely. So I was completely focused on being a clinical pharmacist in hospital and completely focused on pharmacokinetics, and thought that would be the absolute apogee of my career until my professional organization engagement brought me into the political space. And suddenly there was something else which intrigued me. So a real key tip to all of the professionals out there is get involved. You will gain so much more than just the time that you spend and the money that you spend on those organizations. The second is just never stop learning, never stop reading, and never stop trying to see what it is that you're reading can be applied in your work setting. I would open up drug intelligence and clinical pharmacy or the AJHP and go, okay, I don't have the computers and I don't perhaps have the online systems, but I can go to the laboratory and find creatinine levels, and I can work out creatinine clearances myself on a calculator. And how will that be able to change the way in which I practice pharmacy? And then how can I teach an intern how to do that? How can I get the rest of the ward pharmacists to pick up that new skill? So that perpetual seeking after new knowledge and seeking after the opportunities to apply them is important. And then lastly, never forget where it is that you come from. As we get stretched into clinical practice, there is a temptation to think that it's only through writing prescriptions, through making diagnoses that you can contribute. Never forget that it's what makes you a pharmacist that enables you to contribute in those settings. So don't forget your pharmaceutics, don't forget your chemistry, don't forget your kinetics.
It's lovely. You know, our theme for this one, Andy, this interview is definitely closing the loop. You started at the very beginning about remaining a pharmacist, and your top tip is to never forget where you came from. And I love this striving to drive yourself forward constantly, then never stop learning, get involved, keep involved. It's such a good set of mantras here, Andy. And I remember you from my earlier career always being supportive like this. I'm so happy that we've had a little chance to chat. It's been really great. Now, Andy, to end our interview and gain even more insights into maybe what you've had to do during COVID-19 to change our habits and our ways of working. We all have 3 essentials or 5 essentials in our daily lives anyway. What has proved to you to be the 3 essentials you cannot do without in these strange, strange times we're living in?
I'm a voracious reader, and I read predominantly nonfiction, predominantly history, mostly 20th century, but to some extent 19th. And political economy is what really gets me going, but also the history of science. So I think what's kept me going at the moment is going back to read, for example, or reread the history of the 1918 influenza pandemic, the history of Johns Hopkins University and its role in driving medical practice in the United States. So all sorts of things that keep you engaged, but also diverted. Another has been not to just give up and accept what is being delivered to us as policy from on high. There's always an opportunity to engage. We've seen that by questioning, for example, the role of chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine in the management of COVID, we've been able to alter policy, been able to move policy forward and make best use of the evidence that's coming to us. Right now, we're in this grand debate about the role of corticosteroids. And do we all have to go looking after dexamethasone, or are there alternatives? Could we perhaps use prednisolone oral instead? Might it be cheaper? What are the differences? What's the pharmacology of it? So COVID is both a challenge and a wonderful opportunity for us to contribute and to stretch ourselves. Regulatory bodies have a major obligation at the moment to fulfill their mandate in terms of patient safety. And we should not just say it's an emergency, let everything go. So it's hanging on to what it is that we know is the right thing to do at a time when there are many temptations to cut corners and to do things that are not evidence-based.
Such wise words there, Andy. You know, I think you're right. I think this gives us an opportunity, doesn't it? You know, it's a challenge every day of our lives at the moment, but there are opportunities around the corners to really think about where do we all want to be when this is over. And I really like the idea that you've been grounding yourself in the history from 100 years ago, because I think by understanding that, it gives you some stability to what we're going through. Really wise words. I told you I'm learning a lot. So, Andy, the 3 essentials in your working life are to read and to challenge the policymakers. And I'm sure, like all of us, that coffee is playing a key role in there. Andy Gray, it's been an absolute pleasure and an honour to speak with you, to take up some of your time today. What I've seen from the biog is expertise personified, but what I hear through our interview is what I think I've always known, which is a man who's passionate about our profession, who has his feet on the ground with where you've come from, never stops learning and getting involved, but someone who wants to bring people with him through evidence and resources. And I love this closing the loop at every turn. The story of your daughter and the granddaughter of the pharmacy, of the pharmacist major, where you first got inspired, to me has just been a pinnacle to our interview today. Thank you so much. Andy, any reflections before we close and I allow you to go back to your working life?
Thanks, Catherine. It's been a pleasure to share, thoughts and to get them reflected back to me. And I think that in itself is also a closing of a loop. Thank you.
It's very lovely. Thank you, Andy. Be safe, keep well, and we'll see each other in person very, very soon. Thank you, Andy.
Indeed. Thank you.